a second. Blurry on the screen. I don't know if it's me or autofocus. There we go. All right. Good to see everybody this morning. This morning we're going to be in Matthew 24. Matthew chapter 24, dealing with the destruction of Jerusalem. And as Jesus foretells, not going to be destroyed while we're watching, but Jesus is going to be talking about it. And it's 24, 1 through 28, dealing with this here. The writers of this, give you an idea of where they think Jesus talks about the end of the world. And I'll talk about that a little bit. I don't agree with the time period they have on here. But we'll discuss the fact that I've told people view on 24 that most people probably do. But we'll talk about that. Not most. A lot of people are the same because the more you study, you understand that there. But we're going to go into our lesson or into our questions. We start with, first of all, Exodus 20. Describe the stone that God wanted used when the Israelites built an altar of stone. What kind of stone was it? Started with an H. Anybody remember? A hewn stone, exactly right, which means untouched by man. There we go. That was one. All right, did you go black behind me? Okay, never mind. Did it to you. So, the next one, you see Genesis 45. How was God maintaining his promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob through Joseph? How was he maintaining it? A couple things here.
Preserved their lives through saving them through the family.
Saving them through the family, which you see all the promises that were made to them, would still continue to come through Joseph. Because anybody that didn't get taken care of in the family, they died. And we saw that they brought them, of course, to Egypt. So that wouldn't happen. But where in Egypt, though, did Joseph tell his brothers they could live? Goshen. Exactly right. It was in Goshen. Referring to heaven on Matthew 21, Jesus said there would be many or few chosen to enter. Few, as we see it and understand. And, so we find that. One of the next one. Yes or no? Did the Sadducees believe in the resurrection after death? No, they did not. No, not whatsoever. At what point did the Jewish leaders cease to question Jesus? Matthew 22, 41 to 46. There's really not a straight answer there, I guess you'd say, but the answer would be is every time that he would answer with another question or a parable, they couldn't figure it out. They didn't know what was going on, so they'd get stuck. And I remember most of the time, always when they're actually, all the time with Jewish leaders, when they usually ask Jesus a question, they're actually trying to catch him in a trap. And they could never do it, so they just went away and said they would not ask him anymore after that. And we know that, of course, which would lead to the crucifixion after a little while after that. Jesus did not say that the scribes and Pharisees were full of, so what he did not say, full of A, righteousness, B, hypocrisy, C, lawlessness, or D, pretense. So righteousness, exactly right. How did Jesus tell the scribes and Pharisees that they would treat prophets, wise men, and teachers? A major thing they would do for sure, number one. They said they would crucify him. They first said kill him, crucify him, and that was different ways of doing it. And persecute them in all those ways. Exactly right. I mean, we see all that happening, and it's exactly what took place. Which brings us down to Mark 12, 41 to 44. From what location in the temple did Jesus watch the people giving their money? It's the area he was at. He was on steps, but what area was he in? Remember we said it was where, remember you saw the...
Opposite side.
And what was that?
Opposite side of
the opposite side of where we see, of course, the widow giving her money, but what court was that? Everybody remember what court that was called? Women's court. Women's court, exactly, as we look for that. So it was women's court we see. Brings the next one. How much money did the poor widow give? 2 mites, quadrant, which is 1/64th of a month's wage. So we saw that it was very, very tiny. We'll be there going to the next one. So I think that's it. Yep. All right. So that's it. Jesus foretells the destruction of Jerusalem. As we go through this morning, you're gonna. I'm gonna read a lot of it, and don't be like, "Oh, Ernie's not letting us read." No, so I got a lot to cover, and so I'm gonna read it, but I'm gonna stop enough. There may be occasional here and there that I ask somebody to read, but this is without a doubt, this is always a challenging, passage in the Bible for teachers. On the Mount of Olives is where this took place at. As we look to it, given shortly after he had left the temple, that's Jesus with his disciples. It was recorded in Matthew chapter 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, and it's and part of 17, Luke 17. It's very important to see that because you don't really get the whole picture of what's going on here unless you have those other ones. Because once Matthew's talking to Jews, where we see Mark and Luke are talking to Gentiles, and there's a difference in the way it's read. And what we find here, it's commonly referred to, if you've ever heard this, the Olivet Discourse, which means basically it was on the Mount of Olives where it took place, the teaching of what was going on here. Its difficulty is apparent as we look at this. One considers the diversity of interpretations. There's so many different interpretations in this chapter of Matthew 24, meaning the whole thing. Some maintain that it is entirely about the Lord's second coming, the entire chapter. I mean, everything about it, and that's where you get all these crazy beliefs, these crazy thoughts, and everything with it, which are way out there. Others say that it's entirely about the events related to the destruction of Jerusalem, which occurred in 70 AD, the entire chapter, all chapter 24. Yet many believe it contains references to both, both these events. Some dealing with the destruction of Jerusalem and that of the end of the world. That's how I was taught it years and years and years ago. And even in school at Southwest, I was taught that way. I looked at my Bible, chapter 30, verse 35, says destruction of the world from there. I don't agree with that, and I'll tell you what I mean by that when I get to it, because of some studies over the years that I've looked at. I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. And there was a couple verses that always plagued me with a problem. And the more you study, the more you see. You should look at Luke 17, what it actually is. And we'll talk as we go through that. Even those also refer to both events different. As in particular event is being described in Matthew's account, they'll say, yeah, after 35, some of it pertains to the end of the world, but a couple verses here and there need to go back to the destruction of Jerusalem, which makes no sense at all to go back and forth like that. It should all be within the context. When you get to Matthew 25 now, to the next chapter, that's going to talk about through parables the end of the world, what we would see the judgment, and we would see as we get to there. But some say, of course, verses 4 through 28, refer to the destruction of Jerusalem. And then they'll say in verse 29 is where it begins with a discussion about the Lord's second coming. Others contend, as I just said a moment ago, verse 35 begins talking about the second coming. And others say Jesus switches back and forth throughout the whole chapter, and which I've already said that basically, just get an idea. As I've stated before through my studies, I have trouble with Matthew 24 describing both events in the light of Luke 17. Luke 17, when you read Luke 17, it matches so much with Matthew 24. And Luke 17 is talking completely about the destruction of Jerusalem. Nothing to do with the end of the world. And we see that. That's why it's really odd. We get to verse 35 and we say, oh, that's about the end of the world now. And I'll explain my view as we look to that, as we see that. And you may have been taught that all your life, that verse 35. You may have been taught just the opposite. I don't know. But I just ask you to look at it, read it, and if you're concerned about it, if you're not sure, study it. Look what's there. You can do it. It's simple to do as you look through the Bible. So let's look at Luke 17, 22-37. Before we get into this, I want to go ahead and read this. Luke 17, 22-37 is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. And you're going to hear these words. Now, when I read this, when we go back to Matthew 24, it almost sounds identical. There's so much of it that's the same. So let me go ahead and begin reading it. Luke 17. Then he said to the disciples, the days will come when you will desire to see one of the days of the Son of Man. Very important to see that, one of the days. So it's showing two different things here that are happening different days. And he says, and you will not see it. And they will say to you, look here or look there. Do not go after them or follow them. For as the lightning that flashes out of the part under the heaven shines a second. Excuse me. Told I wasn't on the line, but I am. Yeah, I'm on line. All right. And look there, do not here follow them. For as the lightning that flashes out of one part under heaven shines to the other part under heaven, so also the Son of Man will be in his day. But first, he must suffer many things and be rejected by this generation. And as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be also in the days of the Son of Man. They ate, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. Likewise, as it was also in the days of Lot, they ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they built, and then it goes on. But on the day that the Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Even so will it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. In that day, he who is on the housetop and his goods are in the house, let him not come down to take them away. And likewise, the one who is in the field, let him not turn back. Very important to get that. It says, remember Lot's wife, verse 32. Whoever seeks to save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life will preserve it. I tell you, in that night there will be two men in one bed. One will be taken, and the other will be left. Two women will be grinding together. The one will be taken, and the other will be left. Two men will be in the field. The one will be taken, the other will be left. I'll just tell you this right now. Those verses, also in chapter 24, is where you get people talk about the rapture, about the 1,000-year reign, which is all false. And all doesn't make any sense, which it mentions it after verse 35. We're going to see in Matthew 24, and where some say that refers to the end of the world. How could that be? If that's the case, you're agreeing with the rapture. And so let's continue to go on. 2 men up at verse 37, and they answered and said to him, "Where, Lord?" So he said to them, "Wherever the body is, there the eagles will be gathered together." We all know eagles always refers to Roman Empire when it's giving in that reference, and that's the end of there, verse 37. So he alludes to the fact that there's more than one day of the Son of Man, first of all, which we see that was very common throughout. Jesus would talk about that, the day of the Son of Man, different days, different judgments that would happen, and the prophets would talk about it. The Lord will come in judgment ways prior to his final coming, at the last day. In the discourse of Luke 17, or the teaching of Luke 17, you'd say, Jesus uses language very, very similar, as I just said a moment ago in Matthew 24, but in ways that do not allow for a simple division of Matthew 24 has been taught by many. And either at verse 29 or verse 35. For notice this, very important, I want to go back to this. Luke 17, 22 through 37, 26 through 29. I want you to notice, I'm going to show you areas out of Luke and Matthew 24, they parallel one another. Meaning they're talking about the same thing the way they parallel. It says this, beginning in verse 26, I read it, I'll read it again. "And as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be also in the days of the Son of Man. They ate, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. Likewise, it was also in the days of Lot. They ate and drank, they bought, sold, planted, they built. But on the day that Lot went out of Sodom, rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all." So that's 26, 29, we already read. Now I want you to notice Matthew 24. Matthew 24, 37 to 39. I got to get a little bit of this to get back to understand why I'm teaching it the way I am. 37 and 39, it says this, "But as the days of Noah were, so also with the coming of the Son of Man be. For as the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also with the coming of the Son may be." So you see the references there, the same understanding. This is found after verse 29 and after verse 35, which people believe deals with the end of the world. How can that be? Verse 17 is very clear, it's dealing with Jerusalem. Let me show you another one. Luke 17, verse 31. "In that day, he who was in the housetop, his goods are in the house. Let him not come down to take away. And likewise, the one who is in the field, let him not turn back." This is parallel to Matthew 24, 17 through 18, which goes back during the destruction of Jerusalem, which makes sense together. It says, "Let him who is in the housetop not go down and take anything out of the house, and let him who is in the field go back and get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant, to those who are nursing babies in those days." Very interesting verse here, because it's the same thing Isaiah talks about when he was talking about destruction of Babylon, which that's what he's referring to, but they're talking about a kingdom. And then he goes, "And pray that your flight may not be in the winter or on the Sabbath. For then there will be great tribulation, such as not been seen since the beginning of the world until this time. No, nor ever shall be." So as we look at this one more, then Luke 17, well, that one deals with the verses before 29 and 35. One more says, Luke 17, 31, "In that day, he who is on the housetop and is good," wait, didn't I just read that? Come down, let me see, oh, there we go, boom. "I tell you, in that night there will be 2 men in one bed, and the one will be taken, and the other will be left," meaning other beds, not just right there. "And 2 men will be grinding together, 2 women, excuse me, the one will be taken, the other left. 2 men will be in the field, the one will be taken, the other left." Matthew 24, 40 through 41, which deals with this area, Jerusalem. "Then 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken, the other left. 2 men will be grinding in the mill, and one will be taken, the other left." What I'm getting at, Jesus is describing just one event in Luke 17. One event, which seems to be the case without a doubt when you look at that there. He is more than likely then, or I would say is, describing one event in Matthew 24. Why would they go back and forth? They're talking to different audiences that could be part of it, because Gentiles really didn't know about the judgment, everything that would come with it. And so they may be thinking that. But here it is. At this time, as I said, all of the discourse, Matthew 24 is depicting the destruction of Jerusalem, which occurred in 70 AD. The whole chapter is what I teach, is what I believe that happens here, because, and I'm not saying I just believe it because I think it's a good idea, from the studies of the verses and the way the verses apply and what they are, and how would you look at this. So let's go ahead and get to this. To understand today, you have to be here Wednesday. I'll just say that right now. So bring everybody back on Wednesday. To understand today, you have to be on Wednesday, because Wednesday is where we start, verse 29, and move forward all the way through the rest of the chapter. So we begin with the setting of Jesus' teaching about Jerusalem. Remember, the words of Jesus in the temple, his parable depicting Israel's rejection of him. We already talked about that, Matthew 21, and also all the way to chapter 23. His condemnation, remember the scribes and the Pharisees, he discussed that in chapter 23. Also, of course, we know the sadness over Jerusalem he discussed. So let's jump to where we are today. The prophecy of Jesus about the temple, Matthew 24, 1 through 3. Now remember, he's already talked a little bit about it. We're going to read this, and then the apostles start pointing out the temple. And they're basically getting at it like, look how big this is. If this is destroyed, it's got to be what? The end of the world. It was destroyed. That's the way they thought. That's the way they looked at it. They thought nobody could ever destroy the temple. And we see that, but we know that that's, of course, not the case. Matthew 24, 1 through 3 says this. Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, do you not see all these things? Assuredly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another, that shall not be thrown down. Now as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming in the end of the age? So they want to know this, everything that's going on here. So we have these questions, these three questions. When I say three questions, talk about three different areas of the Bible, Mark, Luke, and also that, of course, of Matthew. In Mark's Gospel, two questions are asked. Notice what he says. Tell us, when will these things happen, and what will be the sign that they are about to be fulfilled? And then in Luke chapter 21, verse 7, two more questions are asked, two same questions, basically. So they ask him, saying, Teacher, but when will these things be? And what sign will there be when these things are about to take place? Same thing, dealing with what we talked about, the Jerusalem, everything that's going on there. And then in Matthew's Gospel, the second question is worded a little differently. It sounds like three questions, but it's actually not. It's actually two, where it says these words. Now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? That is one question there. People try to separate it, saying it's two separate ones, which will bring three, which that's where they get the end of the world after Matthew 35, part of it. And so I want us to notice some observations regarding each one of these. As I said earlier, Matthew wrote his gospel to who? Who did he write his gospel? Who's his main audience? The Jewish people. Matthew is Jewish people. The Jewish people. The main audience Jewish people. He likely recorded the question as asked by the disciples, who presume, here they presume the destruction of the temple would mean his coming at the end of the age, meaning the end of the age of Israel, of everything that they would stand for and everything they were. Jewish readers of the gospel would likely have the same conception. Then you go to Mark and Luke. Mark and Luke wrote to the Gentiles. To avoid possible misunderstanding by non-Jewish readers, they worded the disciples' questions to reflect what the discourse is actually about the destruction of Jerusalem. And so as we look at this, when the setting leading up to the Olivet Discourse, to this meeting, this talking, is carefully considered, the subject of Jesus' words become very clear. Very clear. The destruction of the temple is the matter under consideration, not the second coming of Jesus, which I'll show you as we go through this. So Jesus is all of the discourse. What will not be the sign? This is the first thing we need to understand, because Jesus made it very clear with this. What would not be the sign? Well, verses 4 and 5, we have to be careful that none deceive you claiming to be the Christ, he says. So we'll go ahead and read this for us, please.
And Jesus answered and said to them, take heed that no one deceive you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many.
So he's just telling them, it's going to happen, be careful, watch out for this. Then verses 6 through 8, we see, don't be troubled by wars, earthquakes, famine, pestilence. This is important, because whenever this happens, people in the religious world, they go, oh, here it is, it's the end of the world, everything's happening. Yeah, whatever. How many of these have we had? We have all the time. You know, Brother so says, and you will hear of wars, rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end of it is not yet. For the nation will rise against nation, the kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilence, and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. All this took place before AD 70, after Jesus. All of it. And we see it, so it makes so much sense. Such things we see will come, but the end is not yet referring to as we see this, the end is we see referring to that, the destruction of the temple is what will happen, what will come from it. There are only the beginning of sorrows, meaning not the sign of the end. Because if it was the end, there would no longer be what? Sorrows. You're either going to have people in heaven or in hell, and that's it. And we see that, so we see it would continue. anticipate persecution. Jesus anticipated there's going to be persecution, hard times. He says, I know it. You need to anticipate it because it's going to take place. Which brings to verses 9 through 13. Let me go ahead and read this. And it says, then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you. And you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. Imagine this. And then many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. Very important verse. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. And so as we see this here, he says you're going to be killed, you're going to be hated. It's all because of the name of Jesus. If you're following Jesus, believing Jesus, what's going to happen? People are going to be offended, betrayed, false prophets. The love of many will grow cold because of lawlessness. We'll talk about that later. But he who endures the end, notice this, to the end, will be saved. The end here, that we read that there, once again, the end shall be saved, refers here not to the second coming once again, but implying one must live until Christ comes again. Live straight and right throughout all your life. We all know that. There's nothing changed about that. That's the way it's always been. Nor to the destruction of Jerusalem, implying once one has survived that event, one's salvation is secured. People believe that. They believe once it happened, everything's secure, you're good to go, you don't have to worry about anything else. It's not true. We all know what the Bible says. You have to continue to live like Christ. Continue to live in the way that we see. Both to the end of one's life means Revelation 2:10. We are to remain steadfast. We are to remain humble. We are to remain righteous to God in all that we can be, and where we can receive that kind of life in the end. So the gospel of the kingdom. This is where he goes to the next one. Now a lot of people question this. They're like, how can the gospel of the kingdom be preached throughout the whole world? Someone read this, please.
And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come.
Thank you. So here someone say, yeah, this is right way, this is referring to the end of the world because the gospel was never preached to the whole world. Well, I don't know if I agree with that. In fact, I don't, not at all, because the Bible's very clear about it that it was. You know, as a witness to all the nations, it says here, then the end, once again, the destruction of the temple will come, saying, everybody in the world will hear about the word of God before the destruction of the temple. And it's true that that happened. This would end the Jewish sacrifices, other remnants of the Old Testament, that which we know was nailed to the cross. In fact, you know, Paul made it very clear in Colossians 2:14 through 17. It says, having wiped out the handwriting of the requirements that was against us, which was contrary to us, and has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. And we disarmed principalities and powers, made public spectacle of them, triumphing over them in it. So let no one judge you in food or in drink, or regarding a festival or new moon Sabbath, which are a shadow of things to come, but the substance of Christ. So with all this asking, we come to this next thought. Was the gospel preached? Was it actually preached to all the nations prior to the destruction of the temple? If we didn't have any examples in the Bible just saying yes, then we would have to consider that, oh, is this referring to the end of the world? Is that what this judgment is? However, guess what we have? Paul's very clear that guess what the Word of God did? Someone read this for us, please.
They have not obeyed the gospel, for Isaiah says, Lord, who has believed our report? So then faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. But I say, have they not heard? Yes, indeed. Their sound has gone out to all the earth, and their words to the ends of the world.
What does that mean to you there at the end? That the Word of God was what? Preached where? Everywhere, the entire world. Everything that was available during that time in the world that you would know, Mediterranean world, and a little beyond, actually. In fact, it doesn't only happen there. Paul says it again in Colossians 1:23. Someone read this verse for us, please.
If indeed you continue in faith, godly and steadfast, and are not moved away from the hope of the gospel which you heard, which was preached to every creature under heaven, of which I all came to me.
Now this is even interesting even more. He doesn't just say to the whole world, because some say, well, maybe some people weren't listening. Paul said, who all heard about it? Every creature. So he made it very clear. Because remember Jesus, when he gave them the Great Commission, didn't he say to go do that? Preach to all the world, every creature, made it very clear with that. So that's what will not be the sign as we look to these things for this destruction. Which now let's see, what will be the sign as we go Matthew 24:15? Well, it's going to be this. What is the admonition of desolation? This is what he's going to talk about in 24:15. This will be the sign. that something's about to happen to the end of the age of Jerusalem that we would see and understand. So we'll go and read 24:15. I'll show you how we know that that's the case in just a moment. 24:15.
Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whosoever reads, let him understand.
Okay, so very important to look at this. So he says, this is what's going to be this abomination. Jesus is telling them what's going to happen, when this will happen, what will take place. Well, in Mark chapter 13, verse 14, it says, so when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet standing where it ought not, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judah flee to the mountains. Well, let's go ahead and see what basically what Daniel says. Before we get to that, I will say this. Standing in the holy place, Matthew 24:15, is the holy city of Jerusalem. That's exactly what he's referring to there. Well, what does Daniel say? We go all the way back to the time of Daniel. He says that after 60 weeks, after 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end of it shall be with a flood until the end of the war desolations are determined. Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations, here's the wing of abominations, shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consumption which is determined is poured out on the desolate. Now there's a couple thoughts to this. Some, of course, when you go all the way back to, to Antiochus Epiphanes, and we look at him, they call that the abomination of desolation, where it's a desecration of the Jerusalem temple by setting up an altar of Zeus and sacrificing pigs on the altar, that was totally wrong for Jews. So people believe that's what it's referring to. If it is, it's also referring to the Roman Empire, what we see without a doubt is referring to them, the desolation. When we go, how do we know that the desolation is dealing with the Roman Empire? I'll tell you right now. The desolation is dealing with the Roman Empire surrounding Jerusalem. When that happens, you know the abomination of desolation is coming about. This is the time you're looking for. This is the sign. Well, how do we know that? Well, Luke 21. Remember what I said? Luke 21 deals with this also. So we'll go ahead and read that for us. He gives us actually the straight up answer.
But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, you will know that her desolation is near.
Thank you. So this is what we find. Luke explains the abomination of desolation in this moment. In 70 AD, Roman armies surrounded and besieged Jerusalem prior to destroying it, and the temple, the sanctuary, everything was gone, as we see them doing in that moment. Therefore, we know Jesus answers the disciple question. That question they asked a moment ago. What sign will there be when these things are about to take place? And he just gave them to them. So what do you do when you see the sign? Here's the next thought. What to do when you see the sign? What are we to do, God? What are we to do, Jesus? What's to happen? Well, those in Judea are to flee to the mountains. Very simple. Someone, let me see. Someone wants to go ahead and read this. They can't figure out enough time to get through it. Yep, someone go ahead and read this.
Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days. And pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath.
Thank you. So when we read this, Matthew sounds just like what we read in Luke 17, except for one thing at the end there, talking about the winter and the Sabbath. Because the Gentiles, they didn't celebrate the Sabbath. Remember, they didn't look at those things. We see him and Mark writing to the Gentiles. So as we look at this, let's go a little bit further down and continue to read, please.
Sure. For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been seen since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened.
Thank you. So in other words, saying, don't delay by going to your homes, getting your clothes. Oh, I got to get a change of clothes. No, you don't. Just leave, get out of there, or you're going to die with everybody else that's in there. It'll be a difficult time for pregnant and nursing mothers. We know it was I'm not going to go through it all, but when they were stuck there in the walls, it got so bad, brethren. I mean, it got to the point of possibly, they say, eating others. I mean, it was so bad. And that's just a difficult thing to even think about. Praying that your flight will not be in the winter. This means wintertime makes travel what? Difficult. It really does, without a doubt. Everyone knows that. Or on the Sabbath, because on the Sabbath, what happens to all the cities in Israel? Guess what they do with their gates? They close them up. You're stuck. You can't go anywhere. And so that's what we see here. So for there will be a great tribulation, though shortened by the elect's sake, is what he's talking about. For Christians, we know that. But Luke specifies the nature of the tribulation, which is really interesting. Matthew doesn't give us what the tribulation is. Luke, however, does. Luke 21, 23 through 24. So we'll read that for us, please.
Woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. For there will be great stress in the land and wrath upon these people. And they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled.
Thank you. I mean, Luke gives so much information. You know, he's so clear what the tribulation will be and how terrible it would be to be in Jerusalem during this time of AD 70. In fact, there was a Jewish general that was taken captive by the Romans just prior to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. And we actually have his words. These are the words that he offered. Flavius Josephus had them and wrote them where we have them today, still in writing. It says, all the calamities, this is what he said, all the calamities which have befallen any nation from the beginning of the world were but small in comparison with those of the Jews. Now listen to this. The siege of Jerusalem, no fewer than 1,100,000 perished. 1,100,000 perished in Jerusalem, brother. Think about it. During the time of Passover. Because during the time of Passover, you have over than 3 million people, Jews that were assembled. You go, oh, so the rest of them got out. No. In the surrounding provinces, now get this, the surrounding provinces around, they actually got 250,000 more Jews, killed them all. Every single one of them, the Romans did. Then you had 97,000. Only 97,000 were taken captive. Some killed by beasts in the Roman theaters, some sent to work in Egypt, others sold as slaves. This is what Josephus tells us. Now, those that were killed in the theater, we had Christians and Jews by the time of AD 70, so you had both that taking place. We know that the Jews in the city engaged in the Roman battle. They decided, okay, we're done with this, let's go ahead and fight. Titus, the Roman general who was in charge, who was there, who was over all this, being called to return to Rome. It's like, you have to come back to Rome. So guess what he did? Forget it, I'm tired of waiting on them to proceed. They end the siege and stormed the city. And that's what happened. They burnt the city to the ground. Those people we see happening, it's very clear. And so all this happening and going forward, Jesus comes to that moment which we said just a moment ago. He says, don't be misled by false Christs and false prophets, because they will lead you away and out of this area. In fact, 23 through 28, if someone going to read that for us, please.
And if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there, do not believe it. For false Christ and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. So I have told you beforehand. Therefore, if they say to you, look, he is in the desert, do not go out. Or look, he is in the inner room, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together.
Thank you. Sounds a lot like Luke 17 that we read. We'll show in just a moment. So even though those great signs and wonders to see, he says, for the coming judgment, the Son of Man will be like lightning across the sky. Do not expect to find him in the desert, which referred like John the Baptizer, or the inner rooms. When he comes in judgment, it will be swift. Luke 17 will show us this. Now notice, he said there are people, this is after Jesus was resurrected, there are people going to pretend to say they were the Christ. Even of the elect. Who are the elect? Anybody know who the elect are? You and I, Christians. He said, even though someone out of the elect will do this, and this will take place. Well, Luke 17, I'll go and start reading that. I'm not going to go with it. Luke 7, come on, James, there we go. 17, 22 to 24. Luke goes in more detail. I've read this already, but I'll read it again. He then said to the disciples, the days will come when you will desire to see one of the days of the Son of Man, and you will not see it. And they will say to you, look here, or look there, do not go after them or follow them. For as the lightning that flashes out of the part under the heaven shines the other part under heaven, so also the Son of Man will be in his day. So all this giving reference to what we see, this destruction. Well, When the carcass, where the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered in Matthew's account, alluding to Jerusalem surrounded by armies. Remember, that's what we see. Remember the flag of the Roman Empire? Eagle, we see the way it is. They were acting as the eagle, and that's what they were referred to several times. He said this is a sign to them to flee Jerusalem and Judea. Just get out. Leave, get out of here. Don't even stay around anymore. Then in verses 29 and 31, we'll go back to those, is a theological result, we would say, of Jerusalem's fall. Notice in verse 29, immediately after the tribulation of what? Those, what's up there? Days. Is the judgment going to take days? Is there going to be like a 24-hour day, and another 24-hour day, and another 24-hour day? Not at all. Here we see this definitely referring to the destruction of Jerusalem. Some want to say that from the forward refers to the end of the world, of course, but it doesn't make sense with the last for days, as we see here in verse 29. Then you have encouragement. I got 3 minutes left, doing good. Then you have encouragement from Jesus. And I know I'm a little bit in the next week's. I had to do that to bring us all out. 32 and 35. Actually, we'll go ahead and read this here. I don't think I read this yet. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven and the powers of heavens will be shaken. I mean, you start reading that, it sounds like, whoo, this sounds like probably the end of the world. No, this talk like this all the time throughout the Bible, and by the prophets. It says, then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will born. And they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with great sound of trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. We get 31. So as we look at this, I want to end with this last part, 32 and 35, and talk a little bit about all this right here. It says these words. Come on, there we go. Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near at the doors. Very important to get. He's not talking about the doors of heaven. He's not talking about the gates of heaven. He's talking about the doors of Jerusalem, that they're there ready to destroy you. He says, assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. He's talking about that generation right then of who they are. And it says, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. And some will say, oh, see right there, heaven and earth pass away. That's telling us, he says that more than this one place. And what he's getting at here, the referencing is, my words will not pass. No matter what. No matter what happens, my words will already be there. So what do we look at this? We see a local, escapable judgment where Jesus warned those in Judea and in Jerusalem where they're given a sign to let them know when to flee. Jesus, as we see here, is foretelling the destruction of Jerusalem and its temple, which we know without a doubt from history occurred in AD 70. It did. In fact, here's a couple pictures you get. This is what we see today. Here today is what we see at the Rock of the Dome. Everybody knows this is what we find in Jerusalem today. Here is what we would call the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall that Bill was asked about last week. And this is the destruction. This is what's actually there with the temple. A lot of it was destroyed, fell down. We go to another spot right here. This is the Wailing Wall. This is not part of the temple. This is the foundation, and we see that. So important to get this because people go, oh, I get to touch part of the temple. No, that's not part of the temple. That's part of it. It's all the foundation holding what was there before the temple. So as we look at this, without a doubt, it's definitely not a worldwide, inescapable judgment, as would characterize the second coming of Christ. Because Jesus made it very clear, you can run and escape away from it. Can anybody escape the day of judgment? Nobody can escape the day of judgment. We know that without a doubt. Now, I need to say this. Some say, well, does it talk about in the Bible about the end of the world? Of course it does. We know that. Paul talks about 1 Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians. Peter talks about 2 Peter. Makes all this clear. So as we look at this, where do we close with this? The next study, which will be Wednesday, all of it discourse will continue 29 through the end of the chapter. And I'll say this, it's you got to be very careful the way you read it. Make sure you're teaching right, teaching the truth of what's there. And as we'll see, what my studies, my understanding is just going to continue talking about the temple destruction. And I'll show you that when we get there. Jesus, as we look at this, it's really interesting. Remember, there were a lot of what we call the apostolic fathers that wrote books about what happened during the time of the apostles, during the times of Jesus. Some of them within the same century, some removed by a few, but when you take their books, you can actually compile them, and you get 99% of the Bible, everything we have. is found in those books from I'll talk 300 AD all the way back to the time of the first century. In fact, there's one named Eusebius in his ecclesiastical history. This is what's interesting. He's not that far removed from the apostles, a couple hundred years, but I want you to think about this. He wrote about Matthew 24. He wrote about the warnings of it. And all he wrote about was to flee Jerusalem when it was surrounded by the Roman army, because that's what Matthew 24 is about. The whole chapter, if it was about the end of the world, why wouldn't somebody so close to the apostles in the time of Jesus, where they have the original word still then, a lot of it, why wouldn't he actually talk about the destruction of the whole world, the judgment day? Because it doesn't refer to that. And that's what we see there. All right, so we'll leave it there. I'm a minute and a half over. Any comments or questions? Did pretty good. I appreciate everybody reading. I was hoping I could let some read, and did. Good deal. All right, we're in there. Thanks a lot. Any questions before I close? Anybody else? I know it's a lot to take in. Sorry. But that's what they expect. That's what they give us. All right, thanks.